Hello and welcome. My name is Michael Slonecker, and in this video, we'll be talking about the common problems with communication within an organization, and we'll take a look at best practices when it comes to effective communication. This is the second video in a four-part series on common organizational issues, specifically that I've seen in the churches that I've worked, served, and been a member at. From speaking with several others in ministry and from my research, I unfortunately have found that these three issues of communication, accountability, and respect are common. Before we get started, because of some feedback I received on the first video, I want to preface this one by stating that the issues and examples I discuss and provide are in no way targeted towards any one church or any specific individuals. I felt led by the Lord to approach these issues. I'm not trying to call anyone out. But I hope that these four videos can provide some constructive criticism, can identify and address these serious issues, and that it provides the opportunity for those who watch these videos to inspect and evaluate themselves and their church on these issues. First off, let's start by reading some scripture on communication. Let's first look at Colossians 4:6. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Second verse is Ephesians 4:29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up, according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Third verse, we have 2 Timothy 2:16. Avoid godless chatter, because those who indulge in it will become more and more ungodly. And lastly, the last verse is Matthew 12:36. But I tell you that everyone will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. Let's briefly go back over what I said about communication in the last video. Communication is key to any effective business or organization. A church is no exception. A church must have proper communication channels between pastors, staff, deacons, committees, and members. In my experience, I've seen times when communication has been nearly constant, and I've seen times when it's been nearly non-existent. There are periods where my phone has been blown up every day by the staff group text. Weekly staff meeting was mandatory and effective, and there seemed to be new announcements every Sunday morning from the stage. There have been other periods when I've heard from no one for several weeks. Staff meeting has been canceled and neglected, and there are no Sunday morning announcements. This communication issue specifically, I feel, is directly tied to the stress level and attitude of the full-time staff. During spring and fall, when the church is less busy, there is less chaos, there is less stress, and there are less time constraints. During this time, there is more focus put on proper procedure and communication. But during winter and summer, which are busy seasons, it's the exact opposite. Stress and chaos is high, which leads to worse attitudes and less focus on day-to-day tasks and proper performance and procedure. Communication takes a backseat when full-time staff get overloaded, stressed, and feel overworked due to high expectations and demands from each other and from church members. These comments I made last week just cover the surface level of this communication issue. Let's go deeper. First, let's look at two sources to identify where the communication issue comes from. The first is the Top 10 Mistakes Leaders Make by Hans Finzel. We can never communicate enough in our organizations. Like the pulsing red cells rushing through our veins, keeping our bodies alive. Communication systems are the lifeblood of organizations. The folks at the far extremities desperately need to know what is going on in the minds of those at the leadership center, if they are to feel comfortable, safe, and knowledgeable about their work. Communication chaos begins when small groups start getting larger. As long as the organization is small, oral communication is sufficient, and generally everyone knows everything. But as things grow larger, the need for more formal communication grows. As organizations grow from small entrepreneurships into professionally managed organizations. Communication must be given more attention and must become more formal. The second is On-Track Leadership by John Cramp. Trains will not run without fuel. Leaders cannot lead and teams will not work without communication. Compare the leadership process to a train, and communication becomes fuel in the train's fuel car. Team building requires communication. Leaders communicate with their team. Leaders guide team members to communicate with one another. Communication makes the team's group planning process possible and productive. Every facet of leadership requires communication. Yet effective communication remains as elusive as a 4-year-old in a Christmas toy store. Talking, that's easy. Communicating, that's the challenge. Communication becomes complicated because people are different. They respond to other people differently. They gather information differently. They make decisions differently. They approach life differently. Ineffective leaders assume that all people are the same. They generally think that everyone is just like they are. These leaders communicate to others in only one way, their way. Effective leaders recognize that people are different. They work to understand these differences and communicate in ways each person prefers. In the leadership process, communication asks a strategic question. What do you see? Effective leaders recognize that God enables people to see the world differently. The best leaders work hard to understand and affirm those differences in each individual team member. Understanding people and learning to see the world through their eyes will help you to see your ultimate destination more clearly. Clear vision will keep your leadership train moving on the track. So, what causes the communication issue? Where does it come from? Communication issues are multifaceted, meaning that they can be caused by a variety of issues. This probably accounts for why it's such a common issue. I've identified 3 main causes for communication issues within a church. The first is when churches grow. Since all churches should seek to grow or expand in some way, all churches will come face to face with how to evolve communication. And if they don't address it, then it will grow into a communication issue. With more people, you need more and better methods of communication. When the church grows without accounting for how the day-to-day tasks need to change to facilitate and accompany that growth, it can lead to a communication issue. The second cause is when church staff are overworked and overloaded with tasks, expectations, and pressures. This is what I identified in the first video. When peak seasons come around, such as summer break, Christmas, or Easter, tensions rise and attitudes worsen due to the high expectations and traditions that church staff are demanded to meet. The third issue is that communication is not given the attention and focus that it needs. Proper communication doesn't happen by accident. It needs to be trained and facilitated by the senior leadership and other staff members. Part of this training is becoming educated on how to ensure cooperation and inclusion with every staff member, despite personality, leadership, education, age, or any other differences. With these 3 main causes of the communication issue identified, let's look at how to address and fix them. First up is communication issues from church growth. A Management Essentials for Christian Ministries by Michael Anthony and James Estep Jr. They said that effective communication is usually an assumption of most organizations and administrators. It rarely receives attention or consideration until a complication occurs due to communication failure. This is the heart of this first cause. Small churches rely almost entirely on verbal communication. And when they begin to grow, instead of planning how to evolve their communication, the staff continue to rely almost solely on verbal communication. This leaves a lot of room for mistakes, misconceptions, and miscommunications. On the opposite end of the spectrum, a smaller growing church needs to be careful not to over-communicate, as if they were a larger church. Bottom line for this growth cause: is that growing churches need to carefully plan and evaluate new communication strategies as they grow in order to avoid having too little communication and to avoid communication overload. The second is communication issues from high tensions and poor attitudes, especially during peak holidays and seasons. The solution to this issue is not to get rid of large events, traditions, and holidays, but something does need to be done to reduce the workload and stress on staff during these times. In a typical organization, this means vacation days, company retreats, leadership retreats, or other plans that interrupt and distract staff for a time away from high stress and anxiety-inducing responsibilities. I'm not saying churches need to follow this model, but a fun fact about Netflix is that they allow all salary workers unlimited paid vacation days. To avoid high tensions and poor attitudes, churches need to identify their equivalent to unlimited paid vacation days. Churches need to find what they can offer to staff to ease the tension when needed. While that needs to be done, another component to solving this cause is promoting and pushing for a volunteer culture. There are many benefits to developing a volunteer culture, but that could be its own entire video. For the purpose of this video, a volunteer culture benefits the staff by taking off some of the load work that doesn't need staff attention or much education to do. The third and last cause of communication issues is a lack of focus, training, and emphasis. As I said, proper communication doesn't happen by accident. Proper communication takes time, effort, care, and training. Let's go back to Management Essentials for Christian Ministries by Michael Anthony and James Estet Jr. And let's see what they said about communication in an organization and how to ensure it's effective. Principles of organizational communication. Organizations are dependent on developing a culture of communication. They are places where influence, ideas, innovation, and initiatives develop. The style of communication that a particular ministry demonstrates reflects its values and priorities towards ministry. The following principles are helpful guidelines for ministry leaders to remember when seeking to communicate both to their staff as well as their constituents. Number 1, those who serve in leadership capacities should model and champion the cause of open communication throughout the organization. Number 2, ministries need to be vigilant to guard against sending out poor communication, particularly anything that generates miscommunication or misunderstandings. Number 3, Christian organizations should ensure harmony between the communication in word and deed. They should model integrity in what they say they do and what they actually do. Number 4, ministry leaders should communicate regularly with the organization and broader community. A variety of formats for this is recommended: newsletters, memos, meetings, etc. Face-to-face dialogue is always the preferred approach. Number 5, organizations should appoint an individual or team to monitor communications, especially written communications, and develop a schedule and collection for communication. Larger organizations should designate someone as their public information officer and train him or her for these responsibilities. Number 6, ministries must adopt a culture of communication, one in which it is a common experience for members without degenerating into gossip. Methods of communication. Perhaps the two most common forms of verbal communications in organizations are written and spoken. Newsletters, websites, or email are perhaps the most common forms of written communication, but other means of written communications are also common, ranging from manuals to public relations pieces. When writing a piece for publication or making a presentation, 4 general suggestions are as follows. Explain the reason for the communication. Let the reader know your main point. Use summary statements throughout the document or presentation in order to guide the reader's mind through your reasoning. Select your verbiage carefully, using precise wording. Finally, provide visual guideposts, such as fonts and symbols to mark transitions into communication. Most ministries limit themselves in their communication methods, but more can be done to creatively present the information that is necessary for effective operation. Symbolic communication, as demonstrated in one's use of body language, can be a powerful means of communication. Be conscious of communication through gestures or bodily signals. For example, positive body gestures might include smiling, nodding the head in approval, raising the eyebrows to show attention, or moving one's hand to add emphasis. Negative activities might be chewing on a pen to show uncertainty, placing the hand to the face or the neck to show concern, or placing the hand on the forehead or bridge of the nose to signal tension or conflict. Being conscious of your own body language or that of others can aid in the communication. Likewise, intentionally using body language can add in facilitating communication. Visual communications often accompany other forms of communication in the organization. Such items as handouts, still photographs, maps, charts, and other supporting information materials can be used to augment presentations and other forms of spoken communications. While the use of such materials in conjunction with verbal communication does not ensure the transmission of the message, it does increase the means of transmission, and hence raises the probability of accurate and comprehended communication between individuals and within the institution. Modern technology provides a variety of new methods of communication. This is perhaps the one area of communication that many organizations have not fully embraced. A cartoon in leadership seems to readily acknowledge this, showing a church secretary using a Gutenberg-style printing press in her office and asking, "Any word yet, Pastor, about my request for a photocopier?" Such technological innovations as computer-generated projections in worship or group meetings and the use of websites and email are becoming more common in congregations and Christian organizations. And I want to add on to that apps as well. Helpful instructional applications, such as web-based research capabilities, advance the educational agenda of congregations, church camps, schools, and higher education institutions. However, such technologies as video conferencing or meeting via nationwide walkie-talkie have yet to make their way into the communication plans of most Christian organizations. Now note that this was written way before COVID-19, so we're seeing a lot more right now in terms of Zoom or Skype if you still use Skype. Perhaps the most common form of face-to-face communication is a meeting. Chapter 11 has already provided insight into the form and functions of meetings, which I'm going to save for a future video. However, 3 basic questions should be used to assess the communicative dynamic of meetings. Number 1, does your staff have weekly or regularly scheduled staff meetings? Without such meetings, the staff lives in the tyranny of the urgent, and must address matters as they arise. Regularly scheduled meetings allow items to be placed on agendas, and hence provide an opportunity for concerted attention by participants. Number 2, have the meeting participants shared their expectations of communications? Meetings are at their optimal performance in a climate of open communication where information is readily available. If participants' expectations of communication are not met, the meeting will be conducted in a climate of confusion and even suspicion. Number 3, how often does the team evaluate its communication effectiveness? Often communication becomes an assumption, without receiving any direct attention. It is always wise to conduct periodic evaluations of the communication shortfalls and successes in order to enhance it in future meetings. They are the setting wherein most organizational decisions are made, and work is accomplished. The success of meetings relies on effective communication. Conclusion. The process by which decisions are made and communicated within a Christian organization is an essential dynamic. Understanding the fundamental elements involved in decision-making will contribute to leadership effectiveness. Once decisions have been made, however, they must be communicated throughout the organization. Great care must be taken to ensure that there is institutional integrity in the manner in which decisions are made, as well as the methods used to communicate them. Okay, that was a lot of reading, but bringing it all back in. The bottom line is that communication in a church, especially, is vital, and a church without proper communication is in a rough position. Communication issues are caused by not giving it the attention it needs as a part of church growth, by high tensions and poor attitudes in staff, and by not giving it the focus, training, and emphasis that it needs. These issues are all addressable, but they could be prevented and avoided altogether by planning proactively. Communication issues arise and persist from poor planning and poor organizational management. They will only be solved through effective and efficient evaluation, training, and change. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, this is only the second video in a 4-part series. Last week we covered all 3 of the main issues we're going to hit. We're going to hit communication, which was this video. Next video, we're hitting accountability. And lastly, we will hit respect. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you, and God bless.